Hey friend, welcome to Authentic Performance, the podcast. My name is Nat and I'm your host. At Authentic Performance, our mission is to provide education and advocacy for all athletes, developing awareness surrounding identity, purpose, and health, so athletes can live well beyond their sport. To start off season 2 of the podcast, today we have Jason Surrell. Jason coached women's soccer at Azusa Pacific University for 17 years, where he broke many conference and team records with his team's success, even though he doesn't like to talk much about his role in the success because he's incredibly humble. He emphasizes mental toughness and creating a culture where players feel heard and cared for, while also being pushed to reach their highest potential. Jason is also a man of God and is involved in his local church. I've gotten to know Jason through his daughter Taylor, who is my roommate and one of my best friends. Jason has always been such an encouraging and supportive guy, and I'm so grateful that he's offered to share his story with you today. Now let's hear from Jason. Okay, welcome Jason to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. To start things off, I'm just going to give you a chance to tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, Nat, for having me on here. This is pretty cool that you're doing this, and I'm hoping that coaches and players and student athletes stuff will get a chance to listen, because I think it's stuff that people don't normally get a chance to talk about. But I don't know all the stuff you want to know. I'm happily married 25 years. I got an amazing daughter who's in her senior year of college. Those two things right there are the most important thing to me, other than my walk with the Lord and my faith in Jesus. So that's me in a nutshell. Sports has always been a part of my life from the time I could throw a ball at 2. My parents said I was always picking up stuff and throwing stuff and kicking stuff. So, and then that led into playing mostly baseball and soccer through high school and club soccer, and then played soccer in college at Azusa Pacific. And then fell in love with coaching even while I was playing. And then I just coached at a lot of different levels, from club to high school, college, semi-pros for a couple of years. So it was, a joy for me. I ran the women's soccer program at Azusa Pacific for 17 years, and that was a lot of fun to do that. And so, that's just me in a quick nutshell. And I don't love talking about me, so let's keep going.
Did you always know you wanted to coach soccer, or was like earlier on when you were playing baseball, was there ever interest there, or was it always soccer?
No, I don't know that coaching came into play until maybe because my dad always coached my teams and stuff when I was younger, and so until I got older, and he's like, "You guys are out. I can't coach that level anymore." But baseball and soccer were both big for me. I mean, obviously, soccer wasn't very big in the States in my day, so baseball had more of the publicity. But I just fell in love with both, really, to be honest. And then opportunities came for me to play soccer in college, and but even then, my brother was 4 years younger, so my dad was helping coaching, his little, 10-year-old team or whatever. So I would just help, and I enjoyed it. But wasn't sure if I was going to make a go of it. And then I had a teacher in high school. Was my junior in high school was my history teacher. He's actually the baseball coach, and I just thought, man, that'd be cool to be able to coach and to teach. And so that's kind of what brought me into just trying it out, and then just kind of fell in love with it, and I've been doing it. Gosh, I don't even know how many years. So I started probably my first junior varsity job would have been like 1994 or something, and I'm still coaching today. So long time.
That's awesome. So I know you're super humble and you don't like talking about yourself, but your daughter did tell me about some of your accomplishments, a lot of firsts and just big accomplishments within the Azusa Pacific women's soccer team. So what does that mean to you now? What did it mean to you then, getting to kind of set some of those records for the school?
I mean, to be honest, Nat, like the records are cool. I think for me, it's the relationships that were built. We had a team when I was an assistant. The cool part was I got to do like 90% of the recruiting because I was an assistant coach and the head coach left, but I was only like, 23 years old. And they're like, we can't give you a women's soccer team. So then in between, I got to do a bunch of the recruiting, and there's the 97, 98 kind of school year. And so I got to do a bunch of the recruiting. And so I ended up staying on as an assistant when the new coach came. We ended up winning the NAIA National Championship in 1998. And so we had I think it was a 10 or a 20-year reunion. And I bet you we spent 5 minutes talking about soccer and 3 hours talking about the fun and relationships, the inside jokes. And I mean, all the relational pieces. The winning was great, but that wasn't the topic of conversation. So I learned that a little bit the hard way at times, but then towards the end of my career at the college level, I really realized it was more that than anything else. I wish I would have picked up on that maybe a little bit sooner, but it's interesting to look at records and other things, but the things I remember the most are just some of the relationships and the players and just the fun times that we had.
Yeah, and that's what the players remember too. Like, even, I mean, in the moment, you might be like, oh, like, we just want to win this title and everything. But when you really do look back, it's like you don't remember what the score was for, that championship game. You just remember being with the people and building those relationships. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So one thing that you say is that your passion is to help athletes reach their full potential. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of levels to unpack on that, but I think I would say most athletes don't have the ability to push themselves to their max capacity. Whether it's a teammate, whether it's a coach, whether it's whoever is helping them train. I think you need some. I just don't know very many people that are. Yeah, you may be motivated and you may be by yourself. Like, I'm at the gym, I'm working hard, but there's always another level that you can push yourself to. I always come back to this kind of lame story, but it was true. My freshman year in high school, I'm like, I'm going to go out for cross country and get in real good shape for soccer. And the first day they said, oh, we're going to go out and run 3 miles. And I was like, oh, yeah, no problem. I can run 3 miles. Never done it before, never tried it. And so I went and ran 3 miles. But the problem was I ran 1 mile and hated it. And so I stopped and I turned and walked back to school. And I was just like, what was that? Who was like? And so two of my good friends were doing it with me, and they both finished. And they came back later like, what happened? Whatever. And so I was super mad because I'm super competitive. And I was like, okay, how did those guys do it? And I couldn't. So we did the exact same run the next day. And I beat all of my friends the next day. So the only thing that was different was just the mental piece. And so I couldn't have done that on my own. I had to do it with people, pushing me, or my competitiveness saying, hey, let's challenge. So for me, it's knowing you got to get to know your players. I mean, that's the biggest piece. If I used to kind of train and treat everybody the same. And then you start to realize different personalities, different ways of motivation. So later in my career, I actually started every year. I'd have a questionnaire of, hey, how can I best support you? How are you best motivated? Do you like it when I yell at you? Do you like it when I come alongside of you and give you a hug? Or do you like it when I just break down? Like, whatever it is, like, so you'd be surprised at well, you probably wouldn't, but for me, it was a surprise at the time of how many different responses I got. So I would actually carry some of those responses in my folder at practice or at games, in case I was communicating to somebody that, if I'm yelling at them, realizing that actually makes them cry, but the kid next to them, if I yell at them, they're motivated, right? So those type of things. And so that's one thing. You're learning to get to know your players is critical. I think most coaches who coach females really miss that. I can't tell you how many Division I kids we got that hated their Division I experience, and 90% of it was because the coach didn't take time to see how they're doing or check in or see how they are. The bottom line was they just said, we're just a number, they don't care. And so I think that's a big piece in getting them But I think for me, it's pushing them. So, things in practice, like, hey, we're doing this fitness drill. We're going to do 7 circuits. And they finished 7. And I said, all right, now we're going to do one more. Wait, you said we're going to do 7. Yep, we're going to do one more. And they do one more. And I said, all right, I'm going to make you do one. We end up doing 10 of those. And they thought they couldn't get past 7. They got past 8. They got past 9. They got past 10. Now, all of a sudden, you're creating a belief system that they can do more than they actually thought. So it does 2 things. It builds confidence in them, and then also builds confidence that I believe in them to push them that hard. So now there's a trust between the two that starts to get developed. So I'm just out of the firm. Most of my players would say at the end of their careers to me, thank you for pushing me harder than I thought I could push myself. And sometimes, and probably a lot of times, they didn't like it because it is hard. But I think that's the things I love to do, was to try to see those players improve physically and skill wise, but most of their improvement, if they were going to improve at that point in your career, most of it's the mental side and that mental strength of realizing they can do more than they can. Kind of that, hey, I'm going to go run a mile. I can't. Wait a minute, I'm going to go run 3 miles tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that stuff too translates into real life, which I think
Yep.
is super important. Like, I know
Yep.
for me, I had to reflect on my sport experience and like, what does that mean for me now? And there's so many like skills and a lot of character that's built in those, in the trenches when you're like really pushing yourself hard. um have you had kind of a response from players, like obviously like you've said they maybe appreciate it more now, but is there any way that you have noticed it's directly influenced people's life after they graduate from college, like that team atmosphere or even just kind of your mentality?
Well, I certainly think some of the responses I would get from players that went on interviews was a lot of them because there was a shift in the marketplace of like this collaborative team effort. And it didn't used to be like that. Where I think a lot of people that are hiring that are working in those environments like to hire kids I say, but young adults who have been in team environments and they know that they've had to work hard, and being a college athlete is a very difficult thing. And so I think just that on a job interview, on a resume, getting an interview, that helps. And a lot of the kids have said the mental structure that we had, or the mental strength they developed playing, help them when a tough time rolls around in the workplace, or something that comes up in life. And so I'll still get calls from a few every once in a while, checking in. Hey, coach, can you pray for me? I'm going through this, or whatever. And those things, those moments, I enjoy. But yeah, I think there's a direct correlation between success, being a college athlete, and in the workplace.
Yeah. So you talk about like pushing your athletes
Mm-hmm.
kind of beyond their own limitations, because a lot of times it's their own boundaries, especially like in their mind, that's holding
Yep.
them back. How do you do that effectively while also like considering well-being? I know like mental health is on the rise of like considering that, but how do you like find that balance of like, okay, you really do need, to take a day off because like mentally this is too much, or maybe it's just you're limiting yourself because you don't have that belief in yourself.
Yeah, I think I think for me, I think one of my strengths was my ability to read my players, their body language, the way they talk, the way they walk, and so I got many comments like, "Coach, how did you know?" Because I would come up to them like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And you get this like instant like tear up, like I'm going through whatever. Um, and I think it's just a gift the Lord gave me, just to how to relate to people and connect with people. So when I say, get to know your players, it's if you do truly know somebody, right? If you have a relationship with somebody, you're gonna see when they're going. You're gonna know when they're going. So most people they're not really that good at hiding it for very long. They can try to put on a face, but they also know that you care, and I think that's the biggest piece. So even in my evaluations that I would have done on me every year, most of the responses would be, coach pushes us and makes us do things we didn't think we were doing. He pushes us really hard, and we don't mind doing it because we know he cares. So that direct correlation, like, hey, we'll run through a wall for you because we know you care. We may hate what you're telling us to do, but we know you care. It all comes back to me. It all comes back to that's how the Lord created us, right? Like He created us to have relationship with Him and with each other. And I think understanding that So when I talk about pushing players, yeah, there's times where I'm like, hey, this kid does not know how to stop and she's wearing herself out. She needs to, hey, come here, let's have a chat. Like, hey, I can tell physically you're slowing down, and mentally that's hard for them to admit, but I sit them down, take a break, so you have to really be attentive to players that way. And I think that's important. I think that's where sports, I didn't used to be that way. I think that's where a lot of sports are today. The good, successful coaches, and you watch even in whatever, doesn't matter what sport it is, professional sports, the coaches that you can see have a real good relationship with the players. It's because they know them and they care, and the players respond to that.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times how you're going to get the buy-in. I mean, I know like you
Yeah.
had a successful program, and a lot of that is because you've built that trust, and it's not like you versus them. It's everyone collectively trying to get the job done. And you support them not only in their performance. Like I think that's another thing of like you're saying, like checking in on them and like
Yep.
genuinely wanting to know how they are. You're not
Yep.
just caring about how they're performing, but you care about them as humans, which
Right.
I think that goes back to like your belief in Jesus
Yeah.
and just the way that we're called to live, is to love others, and that's a big piece of it, is seeing them as something beyond just their athletic ability.
Yeah, and I think in fairness too, it took me a little bit to learn that. So one funny story is so I was the fiery, like get them going as the assistant, whatever, and the head coach when I was the assistant was the nicer guy, but I was the one that, it was like we like Jason because he makes us work hard, but we like the other guy because he's the nicer guy or whatever, right? Like inside of my championship ring, it said drill sergeant, like that was my nickname. But then switching roles into the head coach, which that's a whole nother conversation. Assistant coaches think being a head coach they could all do it. It's a whole different animal. But it was one of my first games as a coach, and at halftime I'm getting all fired up, and at halftime I look at this girl, I'll never forget it. Her name was Ellen. I'm like, Ellen, I need you to pick it up. I need you to get after it. And I keep talking. I look back, and she's got tears running down her face. And that's when I knew, like, I may know the X's and O's of soccer. I may be able to push kids on the practice field, but clearly I'm missing something. So that started a whole trend for me of studying the differences between men and women and all this kind of stuff. And that's what made me, I think, the gain the success. Because the biggest thing for me is that we were always still winning, but I kept getting feedback that some of the players weren't having a good time. And for guys, a lot of times guys like, well, who cares as long as we're winning? But girls are so relational. It's like, if your worst enemy says, hey, let's go shopping, you're like, why would I do that? But if my worst enemy says, hey, let's go play golf, I'm like, okay, I'll go. Like it's just a different mentality. So having to learn those differences was critical for me. And thinking back to poor Ellen, and just like, oh shoot, I felt so bad. What did I do? So it took me some time to really start to dial that in. But I think that's what a lot of coaches miss, is that understanding their players at whatever level.
Yeah, were there any other like big adjustments that you had to make, like transitioning from coaching males to females? I mean, I know like you do have a daughter, so like you get a little bit more probably of like the girl stuff than some others that may not, have daughters, but
Yeah.
was there anything else that was kind of big in transitioning?
I'm trying to. I'm sure there was. Nothing's coming to mind. Um, I just think it was like the guy stuff was all like, again, it was all business. Go play. Let's focus on soccer. All the other stuff, nobody cares. Just go do your own thing, right? Where the girl stuff, all the relationship piece. So there's a story. The UNC coach, University of North Carolina, Anson Dorrance. The guy's like 20 something Division I women's soccer national championships. He actually speaks to businesses on the differences between men and women. Like the guy's, he's a guru on this because he coached both. But he said that one year his team had won a national championship. They went undefeated. They were returning every player, and they started, I think, 0-2-1. And he's like, couldn't figure out like, how are we not as good as we were? What's happened? He said the only thing that he did different is he hired a male trainer to warm them up and stretch them out. And he goes, so the only thing I knew what to do is let this guy go. He goes, so I fired the guy. he didn't do anything wrong, but he goes, all of a sudden you start to see conversation happening in the stretching circle, and next thing he goes, they were missing that connection. That guy interfered with their ability to connect and as a team. All of a sudden they started gelling together. He goes, I didn't do anything different tactically. He goes, I just realized that my players needed something that they were missing, and that was that time together. So he has a gazillion stories like that, and that's kind of what started my journey on those differences. But I heard he did a conference one time, and it was great. But those type of things, those stories stuck with me, and so it made me look through a different lens in terms of how I coach and how I see players. And I think there was a master's. I got a master's degree in leadership, 2014 or 13, maybe it was 12. I can't 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. And it really opened my eyes to because I did a lot of surveys and stuff with my players. A lot of my research and stuff was around them, and so that kind of stuff made me realize, how do you relate to your players? How do you connect with them? Because a lot of those comments were made in that as well. And so it can't underemphasize or overemphasize enough the importance of that connection. And that's work, right? Like for some people, that's a lot of work to put that much. I think that's probably what wore me out more than anything at the end of the day was that's a lot to keep up with. And if you don't, I think you don't have the success that you can.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I mean, I think a lot of people automatically think because they know the game and they know they can go sit
Yeah.
down and watch film and like
Yep.
understand that then translates into coaching, but
Yeah.
there's obviously so many more factors than just that, and like being able to actually lead your team to want to be successful for
Yeah.
you is huge.
Yeah, my assistant and I, there were many times where we said our best coaching ever was nothing to do with soccer. Some of our best coaching moments where sit the team down, okay, let's talk about it. And they just talk. We didn't say anything. We just got them to talk, and all the stuff gets out. And next thing you know, we go on this winning streak, and you win the league and win a national championship. And you're like, I didn't do anything soccer wise. It was all just based on getting them in the right mindset and the right scope for a right frame of mind to be at their best.
Yeah. I do want to go back real quick to mental toughness because I know that's a
Mm-hmm.
big thing. You've talked about it a little bit. What
Yep.
does it mean to be mentally tough? What does that entail?
Yeah, I think if you would ask some of my staff, I had one particular guy that was with me the whole time. We often said we think that one of our biggest strength was our ability to handle whatever came our way. Our girls, they just didn't. Nothing seemed to really rattle them, and most of it was because of we did. I mean, if you went and watched the practice, you'd be like, dang, that's intense. Like that's hard work. Like the men's players would tell the women's players, like, why does coach make you guys work so hard? We don't even work that hard. And then I would tell them, like, coaches understand, so that's why they don't win as much as we do, and so, and they think, coach, I'm like, I'm not even joking. I'm serious. They don't know how to work hard.
Yeah.
I remember in a lot of it comes from playing experience, but I remember when I was in high school, I played for a really good club team. It was, one of the best in the state. And we had all kinds of guys that go in Division I, blah, blah, blah. The first day I showed up, it was one of those teams like you never thought you could make, but my dad made me go try out. And I'm glad he did. I ended up making it. And so then it's the first day of practice. And they're like, hey, did you bring your running shoes? I was like, my running shoes? So yeah, we go run 5 miles first, then we come back and practice. And I was like, what the heck? So I had to run on the grass until they got back. And so I learned this whole nother level of like fitness. It's not even as much about fitness as the mental toughness that it builds. And so we had a guy, there was this old test called the Cooper test, which for men, it was 2 miles in 12 minutes, which was a national test. Most physios would say that's not even a good soccer test anymore. But back in the day, that's what was kind of the standard. And so I couldn't beat this one guy, Kyle. This made me so mad. He was always first, couldn't beat him. I was always in second. It's good you're in second, but when you finish second all the time, you want to get first.
Yeah.
So Kyle goes to Fresno State, and Fresno State at the time was a top 10 Division I program. And I got word he was a year behind me, so it was my sophomore year in college. He broke the national record for the Cooper test. And so I felt a little bit better, like, okay, here I was chasing this guy. Maybe my time would have been second, like, but you learned there's a level of mental toughness there that carried in. And I was 100% convinced because I know what all my friends were doing on other teams. Nobody was working as hard as we were. And I knew it because I asked my buddies who were on other club teams, and then I'd go to college. Even my freshman year in college, I beat everybody in the fitness tests, even all the seniors, and they were like, "What the heck?" Well, I had learned. I got lucky. I was blessed to be on this club team, and this coach just knew how to bring the best out of us and work hard. So I knew that experience I had as a player, that majority people who played didn't have that experience. So I was asking players to do things that they never thought they could do. And so all it does is just keep raising your level of confidence. And so when I say mental toughness, like, we literally have conversations like, hey, that fitness test that we did at the beginning of the year, do you think any game is harder than that? Like, no. I said, well, then here we go. Like, you've done the hardest thing. So those type of things, you really try to build them up and get them a belief system and really, kind of supplant it in their mind. Like, hey, you're superior to others and you work harder. And so it's all encompassing. All that's all part of that. And so I think, when we hit big games or big moments, or hey, it's an overtime game or whatever, like, we just knew as a group collectively we could do more and that no one else was doing, even if that wasn't actually true, right? Maybe there was a program that was working as hard, but we believed as a group that we are working harder than everybody else.
Yeah. What does it look like as a coach to be mentally tough? Because obviously, like, there is a
Hmm.
lot of, I guess, pressure, and I mean, you're in charge, especially as like a head coach, the leader of a team. So what does it look like for you to be mentally tough in your coaching role?
Hmm. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think as a coach, there are certainly moments where I don't allow the doubt or the uncertainty to be seen. I feel like you have to stay strong and believe, even if you're like, dude, I'm not sure we can beat this team today. You never say it, right? And I even remember a club, again, as a player. I remember a coach thinking, hey, he said, hey, when we beat this team, that puts us into the final, so we just got to be prepared for that the next day. And nobody thought we could beat that team, right? And he was like, when we beat them, and it was the first time, and mentally I went, oh, coach believes we can do this, so maybe we can, right? So that was always my perspective as a coach, is try to present a positive belief in what we're about to accomplish or what we're going to go do. But that's hard. I mean, yeah, it's a good question. Mentally tough as a coach, I think. Yeah, it's tricky because it's not like I had this great belief like I'm the best ever. Or I'm gonna accomplish, the highest winning percentage or the most, coach of the year award. Like, none of those things ever thought
Yeah.
across my mind, right? But it's one of those things where you just, kind of day by day, sounds cliche, but you kind of take one moment at a time and just try to get your players to be at their best, because ultimately that's how you're going to have the most success.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, a lot of what you do is trying to model things for your players. Like, again, even just like the confidence and the belief. Like,
Yep.
if you tell them that you believe in them, then that's going to help them to believe in themselves. So I would guess that a lot of like the mental toughness thing, like, really translates just in the way that you're speaking about things.
Yeah.
Like, especially like, oh, we can do this. That shows that you think that they can, and then they can
Yeah.
gain that
Yeah.
belief
We
as
had
well.
we had a when we transitioned from NAIA to Division 2, we had a year where you had a couple years where you had to sit out from postseason, play, kind of a thing. And the year before, we had gotten to the final of the NAIA, and we had most of the players returning, but there wasn't a whole lot to play for. So I knew that was probably going to be one of my more difficult seasons because I had such a motivated group. So it's kind of a bummer, but at the same time, you got to roll with what you're given. And so we'd lost, like, I think it was two or three. I think one preseason game and then two, like, conference games in a row, which we'd never done, and the group was too good to do it. So I I brought him into locker room, and I kind of lit him up a little bit, and I said, I'm taking over. I said, martial law is fully in effect. Your life is no longer yours. And I said, and you will win your next 11 games, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And they kind of looked around like, all right, let's do that. So it's almost like we reset the goals, but then was also belief. And of course, we won the rest of our games and won a conference championship, because we could still win conference championships. You just couldn't do NCAA postseason. But I remember that thinking, this is what we're doing. And again, that belief of doing it and having a goal to do it, it makes a big difference.
What did, now that you're talking about goals, what did like goal setting look like for your team? Like, was it ever like a early beginning of the season thing where you were like trying to solidify things, or were there more like you kind of relied on individuals to understand their own roles, I guess, or goals?
Yeah, I think there's multiple layers on that. I mean, certainly you're trying to identify player roles early on, and I always tell kids, you always have an opportunity every day in practice is your opportunity. Some people say, I don't get to practice in a game, whatever, but you got an opportunity every day. And I had a leadership team that I met with regularly, and so we would discuss. But almost every year we would do this activity where they're in groups of 4. And to make a long story short, you'd probably 5 other tables or 6 other tables of 4, and you would have someone that would stay and 2 people that would rotate, and then 2 people would stay and 2 people would rotate, and you'd come up with like, things about the team or things that motivate you or whatever. Long story short, we end up everybody rotating to every table. You'd come back and you have a list on butcher paper. You have a list of all the things, and then we would take the top 6 things that we thought or whatever, and we create a word, that kind of said, this is who we are. And so we always had kind of a common theme that they built. It wasn't something, I was very much against, this is what I'm building, this is what I'm telling you to do. I don't think that works. I mean, there has to be the buy-in, and that is certainly something where I gave them a ton of input, and gave them a lot of say and a large voice in a lot of things. Now, maybe not the players, who's playing, and the tactics, but pretty much everything else. What do you want to eat? How do you want to travel? What time you want to leave? Those kind of things. And I'd have those discussions, especially with my leadership team. So then it's a little more supported as well. But then I'm getting insight that I may not have gotten. I think if a coach has the perspective of he always knows what he's doing and everybody else doesn't, I just think you're missing a lot with what players can bring, and because they're the ones going through it, and for some of us, the older you get, not that what you went through was a long time ago, so can't remember. I'm off topic now. I don't remember what you asked me.
No, all good. I'm curious now, just obviously like you stepped away from that program specifically. What did it look like to step away, and how has your relationship with soccer kind of changed, even from just when you were an athlete? Like, what does that relationship progress to be?
Yeah, I think one of the I know our school started to do a few things that I don't even know what they look like, other than have counseling available. But if you think about it, you being an athlete yourself and playing basketball, how do you not identify as a basketball player? How do you not identify as a soccer player? Unless you've had a really tremendous upbringing, and like, you're right, your identity is in Christ and everything else is secondary. And there's very few people that I have met that have that mentality. So usually you identify with what you're good at, right? And so if you no longer do that, then who are you? I think it's a big problem. I can't imagine like a football player who's on television as a college athlete and is in the lights and on the TV, and then all of a sudden he's just done and he's nowhere else to go. I think some of those would probably be crazy extremes, but yeah, it's something that I don't think we discuss enough. I think it's hard for me, because I always stayed coaching. I didn't miss the playing. I was always around the game, so I never really felt like, man, I wish I was still playing. It was more of, I got out and I played. I'm like, man, I'm not good enough shape to play the sport anymore, and I don't want to work to get back to that level of shape. So I think, as a coach, when I stepped away, yeah, I mean, there was certainly some mental hurdles that I had to get over. It was to be honest, it was a bit of a dark season in my life. Just I knew that wasn't who I was, but no matter how much I told myself that, I was like, man, I don't know that I have Christ as my identity deep enough at some level. And so we actually have a really good identity class at our church, and I'd already taken it, right? But I went back over it and just started diving into it. And it's like, man, all these things, it's not about how I feel. It's about what the Word of God says and says who I am. And it's like, man, that's where my real identity is. So it was a process. I would like to tell you that was a quick, oh yeah, I got this figured out. But it was a real challenge because even my parents, even my in-laws, even all my friends, they called me coach. Like that's what they called me. It wasn't like, hey, Jason or whatever. The only kids that called me Surrell were my students at the high school, and then even my soccer kids at the high school would call me coach. So, very much people just called me coach. And so you kind of lose that identity and realizing it wasn't healthy, but it's really hard to avoid that when that's what you do as a career for so long. So yeah, it was challenging. I don't think I realized how much. I don't regret the decision. I think it was no doubt it was the right choice. I was pretty burnt with all the stuff, working multiple jobs, but the identity piece was certainly a difficult one. And I know it is for a lot of the athletes when they step away, and that's all they've done from 5 to 21 or 22 or whatever, right? I mean, that's a big part of your life. And if you're playing at the college level, clearly you've been good and had success.
Yeah, no, and I agree that it's not talked about enough because like I grew up super supportive family, like I went to church, all growing
Yeah.
up and everything, but I don't think I really understood how much my identity was even in my sport until it was gone. And I was like,
Yeah.
no one ever talks about this. Like
Yeah.
how and then I almost felt like isolated as like, oh, I
Yeah.
must be the only one that's struggling so hard to let it go cuz like people let it go all the time and it's no big deal and no one talks about how hard it is, but it's a like you said, it's a huge piece of your life.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there's definitely like healthy ways that you can still have it as a big part of your life but not let it be your entire identity, because
Yeah.
obviously it's one of those temporary things no matter if you play all through college or not. Like I mean, for me it was an
Yep.
injury, but for
Yep.
some people it's just their eligibility's up and then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, what's next?
Yeah.
But it's still a process for
Yeah.
sure. But I think
Yep.
it's interesting hearing even the coaching piece of it too, like
Yeah.
that is a big part of who you are
Yep.
in that season. So
Yeah. Well, and two, I mean, it's like, if you think about it as a coach for as long as I did, all these coaches, all these other schools, and you go to a recruiting tournament and it's like all your buddies and there's all your people and you're hanging out and you're having a good time. And then like all of a sudden you just don't see any of them anymore. And really reality is only a few of them are going to call you. Most of them are acquaintances, but it was still fun to always go to those tournaments and, oh, my buddy here from this college and this college, I haven't seen you. How's it going, man? Those kind of things. And then that was just gone, right? Not to mention, I knew the player piece. Like if I wasn't at the school and have those relationship with the students, that could have been harder. I knew you could always forge new player relationships or relationships or whatever I'm doing. Even though it was hard to let that group go, the last group before I left, but I knew that connection with people could be in other avenues. But that was certainly an interesting time in my life, no doubt.
yeah, but I think it's also interesting that like you clearly enjoyed your job enough to where it did leave an impact when you did kind of step away. Like I know this guy that my dad worked with, just completely unrelated to sports, but he had been working in the same job, all throughout his career. And he was like, why would I want to retire and not get to talk to all of my, best friends, which are my coworkers and that kind of thing. But I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a good sign that you are passionate about what you're doing and that those relationships do matter. And like, it is hard to kind of transition out of it, but that it was a meaningful job and meaningful experience that you got to have.
Yeah, yeah. I think in my coaching career, I want to make sure that I say this. There was certainly a shift for me when I started to understand the verse about the Lord, about Jesus saying, "I didn't come to be served, but to serve." And I think that when we talk about leadership or anything with leadership, like Jesus is the model for everything, right? And his leadership model was to serve people. Yeah, of course he brought correction or whatever, but he walked with people and he served. Again, he said it's better that I didn't come to be served but to serve. And I never once I latched onto that, my lens of how I coached and how I trained my players completely shifted. So early on in my career, and I think most coaches early on in the career, it's about you and how do I survive and how do I build a program that now I can keep my job, right? But I think if coaches would learn earlier, if it's about your players and getting them to buy in, you're actually going to get a better product. But I think that was the major shift. So that's why, like, I don't know my record or my awards or whatever, because it really became, I would say, the last, I don't know, 12 or 13 years of the coaching, maybe 10 years of the coaching, where it really was like this enjoyment of getting to serve and bring the best out of people. And the byproduct of that work and that heart was the result. The results were wins, right? But it wasn't even, the focus was never, hey, let's win. The focus was, let's do stuff together. And, anyway, but that was such a critical piece for me in whatever I do. Right. And so, like, as you played enough, like you had a captain that when they got named captain, now they thought they were the boss and they just told everybody what to do. And you're just like, you don't understand what leadership is. That's not leadership, right? You're just a dictator. That's not who someone wants to play for.
So since you are talking about your faith a little bit, I want to ask if you can share just a little bit of your testimony, your walk with the Lord. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up going to church as a kid. Accepted the Lord in sixth grade. Fell away in high school. My junior and senior year in high school, pretty wild, party, crazy, you name it. I was probably doing it. The fact that I went to a Christian college was a miracle. I had a lot of opportunities, and I went to the campus, and I'd visited a bunch of other ones, and like, there's no way I'm going here, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. It was just totally the Lord just doing that. So it was my sophomore year, my freshman year at a Christian college. I was as wild, as crazy as anybody on campus, and had a reputation so much that when I started dating Leah, that people are like, "Hey, Leah, are you sure you should be dating him?" So it was my sophomore year in college. I was out partying one night and was doing some stuff I shouldn't have been doing. And bottom line was, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. I didn't call the parent. I was just like, literally in a bathroom, like, well, this may be it. And I remember just telling the Lord, like, if I live through this, I'll give you my life again. And from that moment, it's not perfect, but that moment I've been serving the Lord, and that was that moment for me. It's like, okay, this is. And the cool thing was, I was at a Christian school, so I could shift from all my wild party crazy friends very easy to a Christian group of friends, and build those solid relationships. I mean, we still hang out with 6 couples from college that we all met in college. So that was certainly. Glad I ended up at Azusa Pacific, because I can't imagine if I was at one of these other schools I could have gone to, would have been who knows what.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's special about like Christian schools. Like I feel the same way here at GCU, just that there's going to be people that are going to try to push you in the wrong direction, but there's
Sure.
also a lot of people that are like truly pursuing the Lord in everything they do. Like I've been so lucky to have really great relationships with friends that push me in my faith daily.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a unique thing, and I think you can find that at a lot of different places if you're in the right groups and everything. But
Sure.
It does seem, at least for me, the transition from like a school that literally I couldn't find any of my teammates or friends to go to church with me even once, to then here where it's like we'll have a worship night in our apartment just sporadically.
Right.
Like it's a very different environment, and
Yep.
I think it's a special place to be, especially like if you're at the beginning of your walk with Christ, or if you're just like I just want more, and I want
Yeah.
people to do it with. That's really special. I am
Yep.
curious, like, what it was like to coach at a Christian school. Like, how were you able to kind of share your faith with athletes, um, and how would that be different than, say, some other school that doesn't have that affiliation?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there are many times, like, we usually pray before, after practice, but I felt even that got religious in the sense that it was just something we do, right? And so then we would, my first few years, I would say I was more focused on the soccer, and the ministry side of it wasn't as prioritized as I wanted it to be. And so over time, we would start to create small groups, or I'd have a Bible study and it was just volunteer, or the players started writing scriptures that we had on their wrists and, on tape. And we started having, more team conversations around it, or I'd bring in a guest speaker to come at practice, or I'd give a testimony, or someone else would, or someone share something that the Lord did. So it became more of a regular conversation later on, probably, I don't know, probably 12, 13, 14 years of my 17 years, that became a piece, to the point, like my last, I don't know, 7 or 8, like that was really my bigger focus, is just trying to provide spiritual guidance in any way that I could. So I would ask them, I said, they liked me being blunt. That was some of the feedback that I didn't used to do that they wanted. Hey, just be blunt with us. So I'd sit down on a bus, usually on every bus, on every trip, sometimes we drive to San Francisco. So you're 6, 7 hours, whatever, on a bus. So I'd kick somebody out of the seat and sit next to somebody, and we start talking. Then I would say, hey, so how's your walk with Jesus going? And you can imagine what kind of conversations would come out of that. I mean, anything you could think of. And so that really became my focus, and I loved it. I mean, that was the thing. I think that's why I ended up working part-time at a church, because I wanted to still be able to have those real meaningful conversations, things that really matter in life, and have those deep theological, or just conversations about how they're doing and where they're at. And I love being able to correct their mistake in how they think about themselves and their identity. I mean, you'd be surprised, even at the church, majority of my counseling stuff with people comes back to their identity. They just have the wrong identity and theology because they've never learned it, and they let society dictate and tell them who they are. So I love it when kids don't believe. One of my favorite things to do, period, as a teacher, as a coach, as a father, as a husband, is how can I build you up? Like, how can I make you believe in yourself, because I do and other people do, and why you look so negatively on yourself? I love to correct people and pull them out of that negative thinking, because I know it's a common thing where people they're down on themselves and a lot of negativity, and I'm like, why are you thinking that way? What? You just like the challenge. So that's one of I love it. I still do. I just did it to a kid the other day at the high school. I did a young adult at the church on Sunday. You can ask Taylor. She's like, Dad, that's my favorite thing that you do. So I love it. I love it. It's like it's being a coach, but giving a pep talk and trying to fire somebody up, which is great.
Yeah, I've heard the motivational talks are really really good. Sailors talks highly of the inspirational messages.
It's fun. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I think it's just so special that you get to bring that piece of your life, because, like, if you are a devout Christian and, like, you're really living your life for Jesus, like, Jesus is your life, and so it's like it just overflows in everything that you do. But it's really cool that you get to bring that in and have direct conversations about it, because I know sometimes it can be hard, and
Yeah,
in different sectors where, like, that is just looked down upon, but getting to do that on a daily basis is so special.
it is.
I want to end our conversation with this last question that everyone gets to answer on this podcast. What does it look like for you to live authentically?
That's a good question. I think for me, I think I have the mindset of we're all fallen creatures. We all have issues. So knowing that's the starting point, that none of us are perfect. There's only one that was. it's just being, but the authentic self for me is just trying my absolute best to live out and be an example of Christ to others. To know him and to make him known. I know that seems cliche or scriptural, but that's the simple version of it. It's like, how can I? And so, I try to be, I think most people would say that I'm real. And I think that's, the truth is we've gotten that, and Taylor can tell you, we've gotten that from our pastor. He's just a very, very real. And I've learned that. I think where I grew up, I grew up down in Orange County in Irvine. A lot of people put on a false self. So that was something I had to undo and to learn to just be who I am. And some people, I think as you get older too, you and I tell them, even my high school kids, like, the sooner you can stop caring what others think, the sooner you're going to progress and move forward. And so I really believe if I'm being truthful and honest and doing what I think is right, I know not everybody's going to like it, but I'm true to myself, true to the Word of God. And that's how I do it. I mean, I even had not to get off topic, but I had a kid years ago, a player. She's going to be a junior. She didn't play her first 2 years. I had 2 Division I transfers transfer in. They play her exact position. And I sat her down and I debated, like, what do I tell her? Like, you got to be honest with her. Like, she's not going to play, and she's got 2 more years left, and it's her life. It's not mine. She can do what she wants with that. So I told her. She wasn't happy. And I said, hey, you need to give me a decision in about 2 or 3 weeks, what you're going to do, just so we can, move forward one way or the other. Well, I get a phone call about a couple days later from my athletic director saying that the parent had written a letter to the president and how I didn't care about the kid, and all I care about is the kid's money and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, it didn't bother me one bit, because I knew that wasn't true. And so me just being real with people and honest with people, and sometimes people don't like to hear the honesty, but I'd rather err on that side. I'd rather err on telling somebody they're not going to play for 2 years than knowing that they're not and not telling them. So being authentic for me is just trying to be real, open, honest, whatever I'm doing, and just trying to live that way.
Yeah, no,
I'll let you know once I figure it out.
No, I appreciate the realness. I think that's one of my main goals with just like having conversations like this too, is just realizing that things are not going to be perfect. And like, we do live in a world where there's a lot of evil and we mess up all the time.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think owning up to it and leaning into the Lord in those moments is what really, develops that authenticity, and it allows us to connect with people too. Like, that's what I've learned probably the most, is having authentic conversations is how we bond with people, because they're also experiencing very real things. Like, we're all in the same boat in that sense.
True.
Well, thank you so much for being here and
of course
this. It's been a pleasure, and I'm just so excited for people to get to hear this. I hope that coaches will hear this and take your advice from your many years of success and also just building those relationships. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
You got it, Nat. Anytime.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We would love to hear what you found valuable in this episode. So please DM us on Instagram at Authentic Performance or leave a review. They're super, super helpful for us. We're so thankful that you're on this journey with us and want to invite you to be a part of the Authentic Performance fam. You can check out more of how we're supporting athletes at theauthenticperformance.com. Also, let us know what you want to hear on the podcast next, or who you want to hear. We appreciate your feedback and want to give you the best possible resources and support. In the meantime, think about how you can live authentically.